Joe Biden says the United States will defend Taiwan if China attacks. Joining me live now is political analyst and the professor at Curtin University, Joe Siracusa. Joe, good morning to you. What sort of a surprise, if any, does this come to you, and do you think it could lead to backlash?
Good morning, Pete. Yes, I was surprised he said this. Now, it wasn't a slip of the tongue. He meant what he said. He was giving an informal nudge to the Taiwanese that he would back them. Unfortunately, this cuts against the grain of the legislation. Taiwan Relations Act, which replaced the 1954 Defense Treaty, doesn't provide the president with that opportunity to go to war on behalf of Taiwan. In fact, it gives Taiwan all the opportunity to drag Australia and America into their war. So, look, the deal has been Taiwan is a part of China, and they are open to the two-party system. That is, the two governments. They can have their own business model, etc. President Putin has expressed in an interview his surprise about this. The Chinese can understand why the Americans are pushing this issue. They, in fact, the American-led coalition in that neck of the woods would have trouble winning a war in that area because of the close communications and weapon systems with the Chinese. So, look, I think we're edging a little closer to a war we don't want, Pete. I mean, this is really something that could be avoided. And the president, ironically, wrote an op-ed piece 20 years ago to warn George W. Bush, who said the same thing at the same kind of a conference, that he would support Taiwan. And the president reminded him he doesn't have the authority to do that. All he has to do is the authority is to go to Congress with a possible threat to the area. And America doesn't really want to go to war with China, except right now, in terms of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party silent about it. They're baking in this anti-Chinese rhetoric and institutions and organizations, and the Chinese don't know what to make about it. I mean, they are America's #1 economic challenge. They don't want to go to war. They don't have a lot of alliances. They're not threatening the American continent. And so they don't understand what this is about, except antagonizing them. And I think it's a little dangerous to go to war with a country of 1.4 billion people, because, Pete, I think the danger is it would escalate very quickly. America would not take heavy losses. We would, and if anyone's talking about hypersonic weapons, let me tell you, they're not going to have a chance to use these kinds of things. So I think Taiwan has replaced the world's #1 flashpoint, which used to be North Korea, with Taiwan itself. So I think we're edging a little closer to a war that nobody wants.
What does China do to push back against these comments, Joe?
Well, they just had maneuvers in the Taiwan Straits with the Russian Navy, and they've warned America a dozen times. They'll probably give the new American ambassador, Nicholas Burns, a bad time in his confirmation hearings. He kept talking about all the human rights abuses. So they'll make it very uncomfortable for the Americans, and they will push back by pushing their rights or their whatever their program is in the South and East China Sea, and they're going to make it very difficult for the Japanese to choose and the South Koreans to choose, because if there's conflict there, the Americans would have to use those 55,000 troops in Okinawa, and they'd have to use the 35,000 troops in Korea. The trouble is that we don't know what the Koreans and the and the Japanese have to say about this. And so there hasn't been proper consultation. So there's a great deal of confusion. So I think the Chinese would push back in terms of threats to Taiwan. They'd be sending more sorties in their air defense zone. And the Taiwanese, there's a deal here, Pete, and that is China cannot unilaterally change the status there, and Taiwan has no right to declare independence. Let me tell you, if the Tasmanians were going to declare independence tomorrow, or the Californians, I think the Australian and the American government would have something to say about it. So, look, this is their neck of the woods. This was all settled by the Shanghai Communique and several other communiques in the last 30 years. So I think this is one of the most avoidable wars that we could possibly have. And the fact that Biden is marching into this thing, and he's not being silly about it, he knows what he's doing. The fact that he thinks he can push the Chinese around is bad news. The good news, Pete, is there isn't going to be a conflict before February, because that's when the Winter Olympics take place in Beijing.
That's true.
And the Chinese Communist Party isn't going to screw that up.
Okay, Joe Siracusa, good to chat as always. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.